Let's start with introductions. Jereico, why don't you go ahead and start?
Sure thing. How's it going, everyone? My name is Jereico. I'm the Wildhead writer for Augmentation. I also have some Devastation guides and resources over on Jereico.com.
Cool. And then one sentence, how do you feel about Evoker? Augmentation specifically so far?
How do I feel about Augmentation? Oh, it's exciting and new and refreshing and absolutely wild. We'll start there.
Sweet. Okay, we'll do JD next. So JD, tell me your introduction and also let me know how you feel about Augmentation.
Absolutely. So thank you. So I am JD. I am a top-end PvPer for Devastation. I have a YouTube channel for educational guides for Devastation in Arena. And I'm currently top 10 on the ladder for Solo Shuffle for that spec. Augmentation. It's a quick sentence. I mean, when Rets got reworked, we called it in Arena World the Retpocalypse. We're kind of experiencing something similar with that with Augmentation, but yeah, it's definitely changed the game in a way that they could just never go back, and it really feels like if they're gonna really do something about it to fix it, they're gonna have to maybe bring in more support specs. So I'll just leave it at that for now.
Sweet. And then next up, Kess.
You probably know me as Lizzie McGuire. I am a dev main. I played Aug, but I eventually left it and stuck through the pain of being a dev main, and I'm still a dev main. I mostly just do Mythic Plus and Raid. No YouTube or anything like that. Just stream Mythic Plus content and Raid progression, and that's about it. And then I'm gonna be blunt. I hate Aug. I think it's bad. I think maybe the long term, in like 5-10 years when there's several support specs, I think I might have a different opinion on Aug, but currently I think it's bad for the game. I'm not a fan. I'll leave it at that.
It's okay, Kess. You can let it out. This is a safe space.
Yeah.
It
I
basically made me take a big break from the game.
Yeah, I guess this is a good time to kind of talk about that. So this talk is going to be very frank about Augmentation, and we are just going to speak our minds on it. And that includes like the good and the bad. So yeah, my name's Preheat. You know me. I also agree. I think Augmentation it's interesting. It's cool, but it's not working right now. Like either the game needs more supports or they need to like Control Z something about this, because it's not doing it. Yeah, and I'm gonna give. So we're also gonna have Goop here, but he couldn't make it. But I do want to give his quote. So I asked Goop as well from Liquid how he feels about Augmentation specifically in Raid, and he said it's kind of hard to summarize in one sentence, but the gist of what he said was, I think Augmentation needed some more time in the tank or need to be released with some other support specs. It's very fun, very fucking annoying at the same time, and the implications of what it existing does to the comp diversity is troubling, and you've already seen it happen in Mythic Plus. So kind of echoing what we all feel about it as well. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting new. I don't want to say that like Augmentation is like something that just needs to be deleted, but I definitely feel like at this point we've seen it kind of make World of Warcraft even more of a meta comp kind of game, right? And I think that's very frustrating, especially for players who want to play Devastation. Players like me and Kess and a lot of y'all who we signed up for a Devastation, right? Because there was no Augmentation spec, and now suddenly there's this crazy overpowered spec, and I know about y'all, or I don't know about y'all, but like I'm feeling the pressure a lot to play it, right? So I'm sure that a lot of people are also feeling that.
100%.
Are we all playing Aug here, or okay? So you said that you're sticking with Devastation, but are we playing Aug and Farm progression? What's the situation there, JD?
I prefer Devastation 100%. You know, I'm really not a support type player, and Augmentation is exactly just that. In Arena, it's like pretty much a second healer. I prefer Devastation, but I have already gotten pretty high on the ladder for Augmentation. But yeah, I prefer Devastation for sure.
Great. I've been doing kind of a mix of both. So we just kind of just started with our sort of post-clear farm. So I progged Sark on Augmentation, so I'm farming on Augmentation. I progged Echo of Nelth on Devastation, so I'm still playing Devastation on that one. But yeah, all in all, I mean, the trouble really is that uh, if you are in a spot where you relied on augmentation in some way, either because it's really enabling some extra DPS push, or it's enabling some extra survivability, or even frankly, and this is a major point that I'm sure we'll cover, but all else equal, if you put them side by side and they do the same damage, there's sort of very little reason to risk playing Devastation when Aug is just kind of safer overall. I've definitely felt like I should be playing Aug more than Dev on farm, but I'm enjoying Dev is the problem, right? So that's a bit of the balance there for sure.
So what is it that you don't enjoy about it in Raid, Jereico?
All right, so the funny thing is, I've actually got a piece all about this coming up on Wowhead in the next little bit. So at risk of treading the same ground, I won't spoil everything. But for me, the biggest thing is that augmentation has potential to be very fun and interesting if you're sort of ready and willing to spend that time outside of raid to sit down, kind of go through, who's doing damage when, plot out the damage curve, and then come back to your raid and go, hey guys, we should kind of position in this way and do these timings, and if we do that, we'll do a ton of damage. And you sort of see some of these top guilds doing that on farm. I don't know how to board them, or they want to do speed clears or that kind of thing. They'll bring out these strategies, and that's cool, I guess. The problem is when you don't have a cooperative raid, or you just kind of want to show up, quickly clear the raid, and call it a day. Maybe you have different people coming in on the bosses every week, that sort of thing. AUG really rewards you for sitting down and sort of preparing ahead of time. But when you have to play it on the fly and sort of pick targets on the fly, it's not only is it uninteresting, it's just worse. It's just worse to play in general. So
Yeah,
that's sort of point number one.
So JD, I am curious to get the PvP perspective, because I've been like I'm above title for Mythic Plus, and I've been doing the raid every week. So like I think I have a pretty good idea of AUG there. But what is it that PvPers, or I guess first, how do PvP players feel about augmentation? You said it's kind of like the AUG apocalypse, but like what specifically is it that they don't like? And are people just adapting to it, or are people like playing Devastation still?
So I'll start off with this. I played a tournament a couple days ago with Flarkness, one of the DK icon legends of the game, and he hosted a 3v3 tourney, and he specifically banned augmentation. You were not allowed to play it. It has become
Incredibly
a problem
based.
to the point where there used to be a time in Arena where you could actually queue with 2 healers and a DPS. That's essentially what it kind of feels like. No one ever dies if the evoker is left a free cast or like uses utility. You're gonna go with the very deep dampening. They are unkillable. They do pretty good damage now with those buffs, and it gets to the point to the game where it's just unhealthy, right? Like in Raiden and Mythic Plus, I mean, it's like you can't not have it, right? And if you see it and you're fighting in arena, you're just like, oh, this is a go next angle. Like, I can't believe like we're doing this right now. It's just not a fun experience.
Yeah, so while you're saying that, I pulled up the death statistics from Warcraft logs, and I want to point out that this isn't just the entire group of like logs. This is just the top 10. So this is what we can expect, that these players are better than average. In fact, they're better than 90% of players, since they're in the 10%. And I just want to point out very quickly here that there are 2 evoker specs that are outliers. First is Devastation at the very bottom, and Augmentation as the very best DPS spec. Completely opposites, right? So in PvP, is there any other class that has that same problem, like makes it feel like you're fighting 2 healers?
Ret in some senses, their off feeling is crazy. I don't know, for some reason this expansion they allowed lay on hands to be used in arena again, which is like completely troll. Sometimes it feels like, yeah, Ret can maybe fill that gap as far as like a second healer goes, but anytime you see an AUG, you're just like, okay, well, what do we do? We can't go him, right? And we can't really go his teammate because he's just going to keep him alive forever. So it's just like, you kind of have to make a decision and just commit to it, but it doesn't feel good either way you choose.
Would you say that PvP has become better or worse since the release? I mean, I know the answer, but...
Worse, yeah, for sure. On an overall, measure, definitely worse.
Yeah,
which
so
is really bad for that avenue because that scene has already started to die out quite a bit.
Yeah, I could say like balancing across the board is pretty decent right now. Probably some of the best that it's ever been over the last, I want to say, like, I don't know, year or so. But it's still, yeah, I don't understand why they do these reworks and releases like mid-season. It just doesn't make any sense.
yeah, so speaking of that, so Kess, you have been pushing in Mythic Plus for a while, and I want to get your take. So Augmentation came out, right? You're playing Devastation. I'm sure you were enjoying it in some keys. It wasn't necessarily meta. Suddenly there's this new overpowered spec. I saw what it did to the cutoff. Like I saw the cutoff just like immediately jump. What's your impression so far of Augmentation, and is it reasonable to do high keys without an Augmentation in your group?
So when it first came out, I remember the first day it went live, I told myself that I wouldn't play it. And then within like the first 3 hours, all of my friends were doing like, I think at the time it was like everyone was doing like 26s or something. And within the first few hours, people were timing 28, 29, and I had no choice but to play AUG. So then I was like, okay, I'll play it. And then I had a ton of fun of it. I did a big mid-season push and ended up being pretty successful with it. But then I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then one day I hopped into keys and I just didn't play AUG. Like I kind of trolled the group. It was just like a fun friend group, and I kind of trolled them, and I just went dev. And all of a sudden, everyone forgot how to live. And I'm not even kidding. Like the most simple mechanics that you would just live without even thinking about, people died to, like over and over and over. Take the Council of Captains in Freehold, for example. I would always like put blistering scales on a cloth player, right, for the shoots. And without that, every time they got targeted, they no longer were they, they're like, oh, I'm fine. I don't need to pop defensive. I have scales on me, but I was dev, and they would just die. And so it's like, after I saw that, I was like, okay, you literally like cannot do any meaningful high-end content in this game without this spec. It's just too strong. It brings too much, and it completely changes the way you approach like every key, every pull, every boss. And I think that's just way too much. It's way too impactful.
Yeah, so I've seen a lot of people online talking about Augmentation. Obviously, there's a big crowd of people who are just like delete it, right? Who just don't like it for one reason or another. But I'm curious. Do you all think that it's realistic to expect them to leave it the way it is until they add another support, or do we feel like they're gonna just kind of keep muddying the waters, keep diluting it? Like, I know it's kind of a hard question to like assume what they're doing, but Jereico, do you think that there's a reality where they like somehow get it reasonable before adding more supports?
So I'm selfishly really gunning for a couple of like playstyle adjustments and sort of changes to some of the pain points I have around how the spec plays, especially in raid. But I think the most straightforward way to handle it would be, I think we'll see a few more of these 5% tuning nudges every couple weeks. No real major change to the M plus meta, I don't think, for the foreseeable future. It doesn't necessarily look to me like they're looking to make any super major changes to Augmentation in terms of its profile between now and sort of the end of the expansion. At least that's kind of what it looks like to me from here. I'd love to be proven wrong. And I am sort of optimistic in the camp that I think, all else equal, if we didn't have the problem of other specs being underrepresented, I think AUG would be a cool thing. I think the support role is cool. I think having a sort of shot-colored DPS that is sort of overlooking the group in that sense is cool. It's the only spec that does that right now, and it like clearly needs a little bit more in order to have a bit of diversity, right?
How much do you think they would need to nerf Augmentation to make it so that, okay, so first, let me just preface this by saying it's not going to be out of the meta for Mythic Plus, because Mythic Plus isn't really about having the extra damage. It's more so about having the defensives, the fact that it brings that and it buffs the healer, it buffs the tank, all that shit. So just forget about Mythic Plus. Specifically in Raid, how much do you think they would need to nerf the buffs that you're giving for it to be like a choice? Like, oh, we can bring one if we want, as opposed to like, we need to bring, X amount.
So that I think is a really interesting question, because the latest round of nerfs, I think, bring it to a relatively interesting spot where I think the average evoker in a sort of, middle of the road progression mythic guild could consider going either way. Could, if, they're sort of the only evoker in the guild, they could be like, okay, I'll play augmentation and play it relatively well, or I can play devastation, play it relatively well. Probably will end up in a similar damage range. I don't think these nerfs do enough to sort of combat the top end try hard stacking meta, but I don't think I really don't think that affects enough people to design around necessarily, but it's something to consider.
So tell me more about that. So what is it about
Sure.
augmentation that makes it so that if you have more than one, suddenly they're better?
Yeah, so there really are a couple things with it, but the fact of the matter comes down to a couple key things. One is sort of the way that prescience works to allow you to specify targets that receive your ebb and might, and that sort of cascades. It has a cascading effect with sort of your other abilities. Ebb and might directs where your shifting sands go. It also determines which targets will deal extra damage during your Breath of Eons window. And so having control over which targets receive your ebb and might, and said differently, how many targets have prescience active at one time, the more control you have over that, the more you can basically direct damage where it needs to go in a very efficient way. In a raid, different people are doing different damage at different times, and there are players that are doing more burst damage at certain times, and players doing more sustained damage. And the idea is you do want to stack your buffs onto the players doing the most burst damage at any given moment. Now, the additional part is when you have other augmentation evokers in the raid, normally you can't really stack buffs onto players without leveraging prescience, because ebb and might will naturally try and spread. But prescience allows you to override that and stack up to 4 sets of ebb and might onto one target. So what that lets you do, and especially now with the new tier set coming, is you can I don't want to say very easily, you do have to set this up and coordinate, but you can relatively easily set things up so that you can ensure that ebb and might goes on to 4 specific targets, have 4 augmentation evokers buffing those 4 targets. And if they're a relatively bursty class and you're in your cooldowns, you have bloodlust rolling, that is power. Because ultimately you have you have a lot of different effects in play, and one of this big effects is ultimately all of these different buffs that augmentation has applying sort of in tandem with each other. What I gave to Squishy as the term is frankly, mathematically speaking, it's quintic scaling, because there are these 5 buffs that are sort of playing with each other. But really, that's what it comes down to is, whether or not we're going to see guilds actually do that. Of course, it requires that you're fueling 4 augmentation evokers at one time or preparing for it. But that's sort of the reality of how the scaling works. And that's sort of where, if you tune for that part, or sort of that expectation, then the middle of the road augmentation is going to suffer. And if you tune around the middle of the road, then stacking is going to take off. Like there need to be some sort of fundamental changes to actually, decouple those two things, so to speak.
Yeah. So while you're talking, I pulled up your write-up about the tiers so I could kind of show a visual example, because people might be confused. Like, well, how do you have 4 prescience out at a time, right, to like get the ebb and might out? And essentially, it is a very, very tiny window. But I think getting 3 is like very reasonable. Getting 4 is a little iffy. It requires a lot of haste. If you're in like Lust and you've got like 8.5k or more, like Master, it's probably fine. But like, it's also kind of annoying to do because your cooldown is 27 seconds with threads, and then you're going to be trying to like match it up with your prescience window, which is like 32 plus seconds to get like that special window. So it seems a little hard to manage.
I also shared a little image with you, little leak from my article. But basically, the idea is if you have 3 prescience active and you set up your groups something like this, let's say, so that the 4th person is just stacked on top of their respective augmentation evoker. This is sort of how you guarantee that you have 4 buff targets that are receiving all the buffs.
Very cool. Love that.
So just little visual reference.
I like that you have the mage in here too, because we love giving them buffs, but
I thought
maybe not a prescience. Cool. All right. So obviously, if they want to address it in raid, then it seems to me also, I think they have to address the scaling, right? How it scales up, because once again, average player is going to be having maybe not a great time if they keep nerfing it, right? The damage might be even lower than what they're expecting, and the people who enjoy playing augmentation casually are going to have trouble. But then on the high end, it's just completely out of whack. Like people are doing like 30k above the next best class. Like it's just out of control. In Mythic Plus, Kess, what would they need to do to make it so that you wouldn't just automatically bring an augmentation to a group?
I think if they no longer buff the tank and the healer, it levels the playing field a little bit. What I mean by that is I don't think AUG would be mandatory in that you could bring other things. That's one way they could do it. If they don't approach it that way, which I don't think they will, because then the tanks and healers will say that they're left out, is I think they would have to take something away. They bring too much damage. They bring too much defensive buffs. They bring too much utility. They do too much damage. You can't do all of that and have it baked into one spec. It's too much.
Yeah.
Right? Like usually everyone just has like, you know, one or two things they're good at, and then they're weak in this area. AUG's just good at everything. It's just irreplaceable.
Yeah. I definitely think too, it's like there's also like a social aspect to it, where even if they, let's say hypothetically that they tune down the damage to the point where the damage is actually bad, like it's doing like healer damage, right? There's still like a reality where you might just bring it still for like the ability to live in the key, because living is the most important thing to time it. Let's say that that's the situation, right? Because people are getting used to that, right? And you can have an easier time playing with an augmentation in a group. This is also true for Raid. There's almost like a social incentive for other people to ask you to play it. Not only that, you're also buffing them, right? So like if this isn't a real scenario, but let's just say hypothetically that I'm in a guild and there's like a streamer who wants their numbers to be big and they're like a good augmentation buff class. Like they're probably going to lobby to get the augmentation in the raid, right? Because like they want to see their number be bigger. It's fun. Like that's the whole point of support, is that you're buffing your allies, and like that's the fun part of it, right? So like there's almost like a social incentive as on top of like everything else that they're so good at, for people to be like, yo, get that AUG in the raid, swap over from Devastation, we want to see on AUG, that kind of thing. Have y'all been feeling that, like, or is that just, I don't know, I'm curious to see if it's, go ahead.
Originally, yes. So like when it first came out, I didn't want to play it, but then my guild was like, oh, I think we were progging Echo at the time, and they're like, oh, okay, like you should play it, like, you know, you're kind of like trolling if you're not. And then same thing with keys. It's like, well, like it's either you play it or we don't play with you, even if we're your friend. And it's like, okay, so I don't really have a choice. So then I played it, and especially in Raid, I played it for our Echo kill. And then we killed Echo, and then my guild actually kicked me off it. They said, you're never playing that again. Which is very nice.
Tell me what did you do? What's the secret?
Played, yeah.
I was miserable. Like, I wanted to quit. I wanted to get off it. I had no fun. I was, like, falling asleep with my keyboard in Raid. And then, so I'm on the other end of it now. And, like you said, it's like people want to be buffed. Like, in our Raid clear last week, like, on a Amalgamation Chamber, they just sent me and 3 AUG Evokers and a PI left. And everyone else went to the right. So, like, I'm on the other end of it now where it's like, oh, I like AUG, it's fun, I'm getting buffed. But when I was the one buffing, I was just, I couldn't do it, so they kicked me off it.
Let's expand on that. Have we all played Augmentation and Raid here? If you haven't, it's fine. What is it that you don't like about it in Raid? I'll go first. So for me, okay. I actually don't mind the gameplay. There's little things that piss me off, right? Like, you know, having to use Breath of Aeons every 2 minutes and it just being a troll ability that like just sometimes won't work, right? Minor annoyance. Prescient's trying to go on the right target and it's like they're melee and they're closer to you than the boss, but you still can't hit them because the boss's hitbox is big and the ally's hitbox is small. Also minor, right? To me, the thing that actually gets me annoyed with it is when I'm buffing people and I'm trying to like do damage and I look at the logs later and I see like what actually happened, like how my buffs actually worked and where my damage is. And it just feels like there's like a disconnect. Like I don't, my extra effort doesn't feel like it changes anything. I feel like I'm in the raid, I'm watching the target that needs to be killed, like not be killed. And I can't do anything about it. Like, and I know in the back of my mind, like if I was Devastation, I could have pumped that target. I could have destroyed it. I could have saved the day, right? I could have made the play. But since I'm in Augmentation, I'm just in the backpack, right? I'm just along for the ride, watching it all happen. And it's like, there's a glass. I can't go through the glass. I'm just helpless. I'm watching like a bystander.
I actually forgot how silly Breath of Eons is. That's missing from my article. Oops. I need to see if I can find a spot for that. Prescient's 25-yard range, absolutely have. That's miserable, and I have to think it's an oversight. I don't know how that made it through, honestly. Playing in practice in a raid where you can have melee on the other side of the boss, like you're reasonably in range for all intents and purposes, but you just can barely not reach them because they're somewhere very reasonable for the strategy, right? But all in all, again, I think it just comes down to I think, frankly, augmentation is fun again when you have the opportunity to sort of prepare and spend a lot of pulls perfecting your timings and everyone else is on side. Like I actually think that's compelling and interesting. I did whatever 200 300 pulls on Sark progression and I had a good time. I thought that was really fun, and Sark is actually a really good boss for it, so it helps. Because there are some very clear sort of 2-minute windows where you can sort of set up your stuff, and it's really good. But I think on farm I'm really missing it, and this is sort of there are a few reasons. I think you mentioned one or two where like I can have a plan. I can go in and be like, all right, at the 1 minute mark, I'm gonna go ahead and buff these guys, and then maybe they have a mechanic and they delay their cooldowns by 10-15 seconds or something like that, and we're not talking about it obviously because we're just doing farm raiding. And I did no damage that pull, and it's like, oh, great, like good for me. You know what I mean? So to me, I think there's a really big disconnect between, in my opinion, what I consider to be sort of like the full preparation manual gameplay, where you're all in on sort of spreadsheet gaming, and you have the opportunity to sort of perfect that. Whereas the moment to moment gameplay, like on farm or in like a pug or something like that, it doesn't feel very good to me at all. Like that I think is just severely lacking.
Have any of y'all played with like Buyerson as well? Like people buying the boost with gold?
Yep.
Dude, the worst thing is when your buffs go on the buyers, like the proximity one, and I swear I like run away from them, but it's so bad. Okay.
Even playing with another evoker where you're not learning positioning, you know what I mean? Like that's a very similar feel as well.
Also because the strat, so the strat that we all use for Sarkret, right? Where you're like all stacked on the gateway on the pole. If you're like playing multiple augs right now, because that strat was like made before augmentation came out, I feel like you're like constantly buffing the other augmentation.
Yeah, you have to pre-plan basically. You go like one on the left, one on the right kind of thing. I'm the only aug in my raid, thank God, it makes it really easy. But yeah, you have to change the spec entirely, or sorry, change the strategy entirely to account for that, and it's a whole thing for sure.
What were you saying, Kess?
I was just gonna say why I don't like it in raid. Like basically what you guys said is like I don't like the feeling that if I play this pull perfectly on my own part, but my buff targets and the people I'm like caring for essentially, if they don't play well, or like Jereico said, they get a bunch of mechanics or whatever, then my performance is going to suffer greatly from that. And I don't like that. Also, I'm definitely in like a mid-tier dad guild. And like if you're playing AUG and Raid and you don't have the best targets to buff, or like your buff targets don't come to Raid fully prepared or whatever, then the spec just, it doesn't feel rewarding at all to me. Like it feels bad, you know? And then the thing where I found fun with AUG, from the Mythic Plus side of things, is, you know, like being forced and, oh, sorry, I just punched my mic. Being forced and put into that position where like you're shot calling, you're calling things like you're basically like the quarterback of the key. Well, when you then go into raid time, that doesn't really translate. And so because that was the only fun part for me and I couldn't do that in raid anymore, it was like, I don't really enjoy this at all.
Gotcha. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And because you have upheaval and it's like random knock-up, it does kind of make it so that like having anyone else call stops doesn't really make sense. Like you kind of want the augmentation to do that. So, but also that comes along with a lot of annoying little jobs too.
Speaking of upheaval, we had trouble in Sark progress because I would be upheavaling the big guy that needed to be kicked, and it would screw up the kick order. And I don't know if anyone else ran into this, but any way to turn that off in raid maybe in the future, just to
Yeah, it's a bit
save,
troll.
save us like casual guilds of not getting messed up? That'd be great. Thanks. I was not expecting to have that problem.
Yeah. So JD, I'm curious, in PvP, are these things that we're talking about like with raid where it kind of feels like we lost our agency, or like we're having to pick up jobs we don't necessarily enjoy, or maybe we do enjoy those jobs but they don't translate to the other content? Are y'all feeling this in PvP as well, or kind of what's the impression of like what's the role of the person playing augmentation, and are you blaming other people for like not doing enough damage, not securing the kill, or do you feel like you have the ability to secure the kill?
I'm jumping out of my seat here, trying to get. I can't believe that you guys are having the same issues that I'm having in arena. I second everything that you guys are talking about just now. Like if your teammate does not know like their win conditions, or they're just not that skilled, you as an augmentation evoker, you can't like take over the game with your damage. In arena, you got to kill the person to win the game. And if your teammate is not that great, and again doesn't know their win conditions, you are not having a good time, and you're just sitting there like, okay, well, I'm the support. I'm trying to buff this guy enough for him to kill this dude, and he just can't do it. And I'm just sitting here like, oh, I wish I was playing Devastation, but I had cheat death and all these other tools to just, play the way that I want to play, but I can't. So yeah, it's funny that you guys are having the same issue that augmentation has in arena. That's funny.
Yeah, people in chat are also echoing that they're feeling this as well. So I guess this is just like a universal thing, and it's kind of to be expected playing a like support, quote unquote, right? But I think for all of us here, like we were all playing Evoker before augmentation came out. We played it before the concept was even like public, right? So like I don't know about you guys, but like for me, I consider myself a DPS, like a hard DPS carry. Like I'm always trying to top the meters. I'm trying to do the best damage, right? So it'd almost be like if you were playing League of Legends and you were like an ADC main and suddenly you're forced into support, like you're just not going to have a good time. I'm sure that there's people out there who really enjoy support and can deal with the shortcomings and just want to, kind of vibe as a support. But if you're someone who's, if it's not a good fit, right, you're going to be unhappy. The expectations aren't quite meeting what you signed up for, right?
I like the idea of support specs in WoW, and I like that Blizzard like took a shot at that. But again, I just think like, in a couple of years when there's more of it, or when it's more refined and its place in WoW is like figured out, I think it'll be good. I think it'll be good for the game. But yeah, I think Goop said in the group chat like just needed more time in the tank.
I can't believe they put all this effort and time into all these utility things for augmentation when like Devastation just did not get that same treatment, and it came out first.
Dude, doesn't it feel like a slap to the face with the deep breath thing?
Really
we don't even use that talent, but like,
remember the talks on deep breath? Yeah.
You remember the talks we had before AUG came out?
Yeah, I remember.
If you were to go back and watch them and take all of the feedback
Yep.
between your guys' first talk and then the second one that I was in, if you take all the feedback and like little things that were mentioned from us, you can literally make AUG out of those two videos. I swear.
Yeah, I
so
swear they did
frustrating to me.
everything. It was like the threat thing, the deep breath thing, survivability extra. I mean, they obviously went too far with that, but yeah, it does feel a little bit frustrating. Like, come on, where's my love, right? Like, where's the Devastation love?
You were there in the forums. We had like 4,000 comments on that forum. You were there preaching the word.
Oh, I
remember you.
Yeah, Kess was out there too, and I mean, all of us have honestly been pretty outspoken, I think, about Evoker stuff. It really does feel like they just took the notes and they're like, all right, cool, let's just put this in the new one. But speaking of Devastation and Raid, so I've been PTR testing a bit. I don't know if y'all have been playing PTR. But Devastation actually feels pretty good on the PTR. Obviously, the ability to play Devastation is entirely dependent on how good Augmentation is. If you're going to be bringing, 7 Augmentation Evokers, you're in the guild probably doesn't have that many, so you're probably going to be stuck playing it even if you want to play Devastation. So I want to get your impression. So Augmentation aside, what's your impression of Devastation so far on the PTR? And let me know if you haven't touched PTR, that's fine, we'll skip. But Jereico first. What's your impression?
Yeah, so I haven't had a chance to do raid testing, but I've played Devastation on dummies and that kind of thing, just to get a feel, because I played enough Devastation on live that I could figure it out, I'm sure. The new set feels great. Like, as far as I'm concerned, I have to feel a little cautious because I'm coming from, however many expansions of Shadow Priest, where, if you say the word ramp, I'm like, crap. What's that going to do to my raid profile? Like, are some bosses going to be bad as a result? Like, how's that going to work? But feel-wise, it feels like it makes a lot of sense. Basically, it feels like I have kind of a one-on, one-off sort of rhythm to Dragon Rage. When we drop Dragon Rage, it feels like I'm kind of still in Dragon Rage with all the resources that we have. Like, it feels really good to play. No notes. Like, I've always gotten the sense that they kind of want to keep Devastation, relatively simple. Like, nothing sort of too complicated as far as sets go. Especially at the very least, just this expansion. Maybe next expansion we get sort of more. So I mean, as far as this goes, it's a great set to keep it simple. I love it.
Yeah, so let's cover what that set does again. So I'm just going to show this on the screen. So the 2-piece makes it so your Dragon Rage, while it's active, you get a stacking buff. Every 6 seconds, you should always be able to get 34 seconds of Dragon Rage at a very bare minimum. If you're playing Event Horizon, very often you'll end up going above that. But this is just 25% more damage at the end of your Dragon Rage. If you extend it, there's an incentive there, right? Because you get the damage buff for longer. And then afterwards, you keep that around for 25 seconds. So let's say you do the bare minimum, 34 seconds, plus the 25, you're at 59 seconds of cooldowns, which is actually kind of long. Kind of a long set of cooldowns, but hey, pairs pretty good with Augmentation because they're giving you a really long buff, especially on the pole. Okay, let's talk the new Mastery, because they did a pretty big change on the Mastery. Jereico, what is it looking like when it comes to our secondary stats?
Yeah, and I'm going to have to change all my charts on my website, which is going to be a huge pain in the ass. All my beautiful stuff that I did at the start of the expansion. Because no longer, now we have a 30% floor where Mastery just remains as good until the boss dies. And what this effectively does, again, and anytime they take Mastery, they nerf Mastery overall, and then they buff the spec by giving it a damage aura, the value of Mastery comes down. And they've done this a couple times now. Mastery started the expansion, frankly, as one of the best secondary stats I've ever seen for any spec in terms of value, in terms of budget. And the only issue was, of course, this damage profile that was very lopsided, where you do all of your damage at the start of a fight and you do barely any at the end of the fight. And obviously, we counteract that with good cooldown usage, but it's still an issue. So they've done this a couple times where they flattened it out, a little more, and here we are now where it's even flatter and we have this floor. What this will do in terms of the preliminary sims that I've seen is it brings sort of the 4 secondary stats, including versatility, sort of closer together than they've ever been before. We're at the end of an expansion, which means we have a lot of secondaries to work with. Haste and crit were sort of previously pretty equal in value. Mastery has come down, and we have a lot of secondaries to work with. It's kind of looking like we're going to be spreading things around. We're going to be going to sort of the DR on probably Haste, Crit, and Mastery. We might prefer Haste and Crit over Mastery slightly. So that might be a little bit of a shift to how we're gearing now. We might actually prefer Haste and Crit a little bit over Mastery. But we're going to have a balance of all of them, including versatility, ultimately. Because Verse will be up there after you've sort of had your fill and are hitting the DR with the other 3. It's very balanced from a gearing standpoint. So, I mean, if you've ever had any worry that, oh crap, how do I fit this like Verse crit ring that I got into my build? You might be able to, right? So that's cool. The counter and the big issue as someone that will probably be playing Augmentation as well is that Augmentation is still all in Mastery, 100% Mastery. Do not think about running a piece that doesn't have Mastery on it. And so that's going to be a bit of a challenge. But, as far as Dev is concerned, I think it's a good change overall to sort of have a decent balance of secondaries for sure.
Kess, have you been playing much on the PTR?
Yeah, I only raid tested the first raid testing, but I've done a ton of keys.
And are you playing Devastation or Augmentation mainly in those keys?
I've only played Dev.
Sweet. What's your impression of the new mastery changes and just like the tier overall?
I like the mastery changes, especially for Mythic Plus, when it's like anytime you were chain pulling, and usually when you're chain pulling, like sometimes there's a priority mob that's like 5% health, straggling in the back. And if you were the only one hitting it as a dev, hitting a mob that low just felt terrible. It's like, oh, I just want to get to the new stuff, but this has to die. So the mastery change for Mythic Plus feels great, especially on boss fights. Overall, very happy with that. The tier set, I'm a big fan of, but there's two sides to this. I'm a big fan of it in controlled groups. And what I mean by that is, like a push group or you're in Discord or whatever, you have some sort of communication going on with your tank.
And then we're going to say
the other side of this is I don't like the tier set in groups that might play slower or where your tank might not be comfortable constantly chain pulling.
Yeah.
Because you essentially don't.
You just don't get
that buff at all.
Yeah.
So I think in the lower keys that might make Dev look a lot worse than it actually is. But yeah,
that's probably right. Yeah.
Yeah, but in the big keys, I was putting up numbers. It was feeling pretty good. My only issue with Dev going into the next patch, other than Aug, is I don't like that our gameplay isn't really changing. Like, there's no new talent builds. Nothing got changed around. Nothing's been buffed on the bottom left side or anything like that. You're kind of just gonna plug and play, as far as I know, like the same build, and it's kind of boring. Usually in a new patch, at least something changes, but it's just pretty plug and play for Mythic Plus. Like, you play one build.
Well, the change is that you get to worry less about your empower timings. You can just send them now, which I'm kind of happy because obviously thinking less about your rotation is not necessarily spicing up anything, but yeah, I do think there's sort of a balance because they I do think they have Devastation kind of more on their radar in terms of easy to approach, accessible DPS specs, but at the same time, it would be nice to see something spice things up a little bit.
The only thing I'm worried about with the tier set, and I think this is how I would sum it up, is in a way your damage, your overall damage in the key, is kind of feels like it's at the hand of your tank.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if that's going to be a good thing for a casual or the average player. I think at the higher end, it's going to be awesome, but I'm not sure how people will feel about it in the mid tier.
Yeah, I definitely have the same feelings. I was just pugging by just going in the group finder, and it was I swear 90% of the time my 4-piece bonus got completely wasted. Or we would do a pull and someone would die at the very end of the pull, and then it's oh great, now I'm just gonna they're gonna spend 20 seconds resing this guy and thinking about what they're gonna do next, and then it's just every single time this happens. So having long cooldowns is great if the content matches it, if there's actually time to be constantly attacking. But having it be like that when pulls are short, when you're always killing the pull in let's say in an AoE, your Dragon Rage lasts even longer, right? So you're killing the pull in let's say 50 seconds or something. It's great. Now what, right? Now what am I supposed to do with this buff that's just wasting? I'm full essence burst, and it just it feels really bad.
I see an instance where I feel like this is going to happen a lot in Pug keys, and then people are going to put a bad name on Devastation Evoker. One of two things. One, they're going to do low damage because their tier set is not being used, so they're going into the next pull with no damage amp, no cooldowns, and that's not great. Second thing is, I feel like it could incentivize Devastation Evokers maybe rescuing the tank to the next pull, or pulling the pack for him, and then you know how that goes, right? That's one of my worries.
It's literally Fire Mage with SKB.
Yeah.
Or how it was before they changed it.
Getting major Shadow Priest flashbacks to pull the next.
Or Venthyr Boom.
Let's go. Yeah. So I mean, we've kind of been down that road before, and like I think we know that it is an issue and has been an issue in sort of pug groups and that kind of thing. So I don't know. I think brace for the inevitable around that. I think that's somewhat unavoidable with this sort of play style, unfortunately.
So we have a question in chat about Firestorm. So Firestorm, remember that ability, that one that we used in testing a little bit and then we never really used again? Yeah, so the fact that it still isn't attached to target, the fact that it's still on the ground, no one uses this talent, right? Like, is anyone using Firestorm? Are you using PvP, JD?
You know, I tested I'm a big theorycraft tester for the PvP like limit test. Jereico, I love all your spreadsheets. I'm a big fan. I've used that in a lot of my my theory crafting as well. I tested a Firestorm build for like melee, trying to just like drop it on myself and then just spam pyre while I'm getting trained with like a leech amp to like all my enchants. It just didn't work out. It's just not good. Yeah, so I gave it a good shot, but yeah, it's just not good.
I just like they spent so much time working on this talent and still it is just not worth using like in any circumstance, right? So I almost like wonder, have they just given up on the left side of the tree, or like what's the deal, right? Like there's a lot of ways they can make this talent better, but even if you like create a direct connection to Firestorm so that you could get to it without having to waste a point, it still just doesn't seem worth it, like under any circumstance.
It's just in the way too for even if you wanted to get to that talent that extends your fire breath with red spells. I'm pretty sure none of you guys even take that.
Now we give up on Never Burning last year.
Yeah, so
no, I
left
think
side's just
they've
useless.
mostly just given up on it, and I mean, like, I'm not looking for a quick hack for them to make it relevant. Like, I think the spell needs to be reworked for me to consider it sort of fun in the contexts that it would be played in. I mean, again, like I played Firestorm a little bit on the council boss last year, and it was like, sure, I mean that works, right? But outside of pretty much exactly that, I'm mostly just swearing at my group for moving the mobs out of my Firestorm and wishing that I could just push Pyre and not have to worry about it. So like, I think until they're willing to make some changes to how that works, I'm happy to just ignore it personally. And I mean, it really limits our talent tree, but it's better than the alternative in my opinion right now.
I agree. Whenever people in my chat ask me like, hey, why don't you play Firestorm? Or like, would you play Firestorm if it did X amount damage? I'm like, no, I don't want to play that ability. Like, it's terrible. I hate having the ground effect. And it's like, it's actually uniquely terrible too, because if you think about it, Firestorm is actually like so much worse than its other contemporaries, like the other ground effects. Number one, it lasts so long. Like, in order to get the full effect of Firestorm, you have to have the mob sitting at longer than anyone else's ground effects, right? And the other ones, they give you like partial value. Like with Blizzard, you're like constantly, placing them, and you're getting CDR from it. So even if you don't get the full effectiveness, you're getting like something out of it, right? And the fact that you're like constantly layering them down means you can like move them. But with Firestorm, it's like you put it down, and then either they're in there or they're not. And it like if they aren't in it the whole time, then it's not worth it. Even if they're in it the whole time, it's still not worth it. But like, let's say that they buffed it, right? It's seriously a pain. So like, would y'all want to see it change to like follow the target, or just like be completely reworked? Like, what's the temperature? What are we feeling about on that one?
It's like Udyr in League of Legends now. You ever play that? He's got a storm thing that follows them as they
or
move.
like Ravager.
That would be nice.
yeah.
Or it maybe like just it's got to be instant cast with like an essence burst or something. You just can't stand there and cast it and then have everybody move out of it. It's just
I'd be willing to try the version that follows the target around. I mean, that seems neat at the very least, and like visually, it'd probably be pretty cool. If it can't stay the way it is. Like I don't want to play the current version.
If it followed the target around and it was a cast time, I think I'd be okay with it. But if it's a cast time and it's just a stationary thing that has a cooldown, because like Blizzard's a hard casted spell unless you have a frozen world or something, right? Yeah, so then it's insta cast. That feels great. Our version of that is like a casino within a casino, and it never procs, and when it does proc, it still feels bad. It just does nothing. So like, I don't know, if they left the hard cast but it followed the target, maybe, or if they wanted to make the free cast proc more or something, sure. But yeah, it just needs a whole redesign. The right side of the tree is just too good.
I'm also like really confused why it's Living Flame that does it, because like in theory you're AoEing, right? So like Azure Strike seems like the more proper candidate, or like if you're doing red spells, Pyre maybe, but like Living Flame? Really? Because that just forces it into a niche where it's like, this is only for council bosses, right? Which you get once every patch if you're lucky. This patch we didn't really get one, but like next patch we'll probably have. Well, actually no, we won't use it there because the bosses are constantly moving. So yeah, you just have the one council fight the entire expansion where it was useful. So I don't know.
Living Flame there is a bit of a head scratcher for sure.
The other talent that gives us the free Firestorm is from Pyres, right? It's like cast 12 Pyres and you get a free.
Oh, you're talking about Feed the Flames. Yes.
Yeah, Feed the Flames. So it's like, why is that one? Why is Pyre proccing a Firestorm there, but then the other one's Living Flame? It just doesn't make sense. Like, those would synergize so well.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot that could be done here that would be interesting, but even then it's like your build is just so good at cleaving already, like the standard build that you go, right?
Yeah.
I feel like it's really hard to justify. And I've even done sims where like I break the talent tree and I allow myself to go from Volatility down to Firestorm down to Feed the Flames from Raging Inferno and Snapfire. And even in those, like it's not even like really competitive. Obviously the APL isn't like perfectly optimized for it. And we've put way more time into like getting the normal build to work well, right? But like still it should present like some sort of incentive to be like, oh, I want to go this, right? Because you're having the inconvenience of having to keep them up still. Like that should make up for it somehow. You know what I mean? I don't know. I don't really know what to do with that talent, and I don't like it, so I'm kind of glad it's not good, but also I would like if there was a little more variety in our tree. I think we all kind of feel that way. But yeah, maybe it attaches to the mob. That would be kind of fun.
Yeah, you pick one mob and it just follows them like Prio.
Have you ever used it like to break rogues out of stealth or something like that in PvP? Or is there...
I you know what, originally, yes. Like I theory crafted that. I was like, how, like, because you know how squishy we were like in the beginning. So like that was one of my pain points was, okay, if there's a rogue, I'm just dead, right? So I was like, all right, well, how am I going to get him out? I guess I'm going to have to maybe get lucky with a Firestorm, just like you would with Mage, like with a Blizzard or a Flame Strike, whatever. But yeah, I'm giving up too much. I can't spend the point. I can't do it.
Yeah. Speaking of spending points to give up something, so there's an interesting situation. The last boss that we get to test, the hardest boss on PTR, is the penultimate boss, right? This is the boss where essentially we're flying through green orbs to get a buff. Really, really awesome fight. Has the dragon riding as part of it. But what's interesting about the fight is there's a very important mechanic where you get rooted. Happens about every minute. And those roots have to be broken or else people die because other mechanics are happening. And I did this testing as Devastation, actually, and I loved Onyx Legacy, but I was like, what do I drop to pick up Onyx Legacy? I was dropping Burnout, which I feel really bad about doing, but I was doing it anyways. If you guys were to, let's say, do this fight, and if it's like we have to have Deep Breath every minute, it's just like too good to pass up. How are we feeling about that? Like, are we happy with this setup here, or do we feel like maybe it's just a little too punishing to try and remove a point? Jereico, I'll ask you first.
Well, I haven't. Okay, thinking right on the fly. I mean, mathematically, it's probably Burnout. I'd be curious to see what sims look like with Iridescence without necessarily playing around it, since that's not necessarily a binding constraint of the new set. But I'm sure it's still sort of worthwhile. But no, I mean that sort of mechanic strikes me as something where you would try and take Onyx Legacy on that fight for sure. Yeah, just looking at this, of course, because it's third tier. Yeah, that's probably my best guess. Of course, you can't touch Scintillation, you can't touch the middle. Yeah, that would be my first guess. Is it annoying? Absolutely. Burnout's obviously such a fixture of playing the spec and raid, but yeah, looking at the alternatives, I don't love it. I would try and play it though for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, like, our tree does feel very rigid, right? Like, if we look at the keystones, obviously our keystones are now very strong. They've moved them all down to where they, kind of belong, right? Like Iridescence and, or I'd say like Scintillation and Causality mostly feel like they're just irreplaceable. But Kess, how do you feel like you're playing around Iridescence a lot and Power Swell, or are you just kind of like ignoring it whenever you're playing Devastation?
It's something I always pay attention to. Yeah, I'm always
Well,
tracking
and
those
the
two.
current set, like absolutely, you should 100%. Like, there's no question. Next year still probably makes a little bit of sense, but less so, obviously. So.
So I mean, are you like satisfied with how it is, or do you feel like you want like more flexibility in the current class tree?
I like the playstyle right now a lot, and I like like I said, the right side of the tree is just so strong, and it plays well. It's really smooth. You have really good cleave, good 2-target cleave, good single target, good mass AOE. But then I see like all my friends playing other specs, and they still get to do a mix of all of that, but they can swap like 1 or 2 talent points here and there depending on the key. We just don't do that, you know? Or even on a raid boss, it's like you're very rarely switching meaningful talent points, you know? It's like a single target boss or a cleave boss. Two
I have
builds.
thoughts on that philosophy in general, and I'm kind of curious, maybe to ask what sort of utility you might want to be able to swap in the damage tree. Like, what sort of profile would you like to be able to talent for? Yes.
Yeah, depending on like, so like let's say like Brackenhide, for instance, that's or Freehold, like,
Yeah.
you know, in a situation like that, if I wanted to take even more AoE and give up a little bit of my 2-target cleave or my single target or something, because the bulk of the dungeon is just mass AoE, then like that would feel good. But I'd be willing to give something up. If I do that now, I'm just giving up essentially everything.
Yeah,
You
because
know?
I think in general with talent trees, I think a lot of specs have suffered through sort of this expansion with this idea of too many choices make for some very difficult decisions and keys. Where if
Yeah.
you sort of have too many options, now suddenly you're only doing AOE damage, right? Or you're only doing single target. And having this really rigid spec tree where we only have sort of 2 or 3 floating points means that generally speaking, the spec's just good all the time, in my opinion. But like I think that's sort of the trade-off. Like to me, I'm sort of willing to have this, and I think it's because I think the spec's fun to play. I'm willing to sort of sit here and say, yeah, don't mess around with it too much because I'm having fun. The second I stop having fun, you can mess with it, but until then, it is
Yeah.
pretty well balanced. It's pretty effective, and I'm having a good time with it. Right?
You're
So,
100% right, and I agree with that. I guess for me, it's more from the approach of like, I like going into a new patch and at least seeing some sort of change, whether that's through my
Sure.
tier set forcing me into talents or this talent's getting buffed, that talent's getting buffed, and it moves my tree around even just a little bit. But like for us, it's just, I don't know.
It definitely
It
keeps
could
things
become
interesting. I
stale.
agree for sure. I hear that.
Yeah. That would be my only thing.
I definitely agree. Like having your class stay the same throughout different patches is kind of lame. Like historically, tier sets were what changed that, right? What mixed things up, so to speak. It seems like they've kind of gone away from that idea for a lot of classes. But I am kind of looking at chat too, and I see an interesting point brought up. So one thing that's obviously like our tier set's very strong. Like it's one of the strongest tier sets. It's about at par with our current tier set, which is also one of the strongest tier sets. But it only really does anything if we're able to press Dragon Rage, right? Obviously, it does damage after Dragon Rage. Like we get that benefit at the tail end of it. But like if you're having to hold it, then you're kind of getting disadvantaged by it. So do we feel like the current tier has like a necessary, I guess, cost like benefit, or are we feeling like we're maybe getting ripped off a little bit on it? I guess we'll take the PvP perspective first. JD, how do you feel about it in PvP?
Yeah, I want my money back. It's like you said. I mean, tying a tier set to 2-minute cooldowns and really. I mean, tier sets in Arena are nerfed by 50%, but it's interesting when you put in effect that's not necessarily tied to damage or healing. Like, what do we get? Essence burst 5 times for however many seconds. After Dragon Rage, like that's cool and everything. But I feel like our Essence burst generation is pretty good on its own. So it's not really going to be like a huge game changer. But yeah, the damage portion is nerfed by 50% in Arena. So, I mean, even Obsidian Shards right now, 2 set, is doing like 2% of my damage overall. Like it's nothing. Like I don't even run Force set because I just want max mastery just to do, you know, the maximum amount of damage. So I could see myself not even going it.
Interesting. What about you, Jereico?
I was just thinking, like, unless there's like a gimmick boss, it's never an issue in raid, right? Like, the only time you're really worried in raid about something like that is if either, you know, there's like a burst phase where, you know, you need to do damage immediately. In which case, have fun. Someone else can do damage, right? We're ramping. But most fights, generally speaking, you're gonna use Dragon Rage on pull, and then you're gonna try and use it on cooldown. And frankly, something that we, you know, technically glossed over with the mastery change. There's no benefit anymore to holding Dragon Rage to the last possible moment. Generally speaking, in raid, you can now just, as long as you're in that bottom 30%, you can basically send it whenever, and you're not going to lose value by casting it early, so to speak. So maybe even less than it was before. Would that possibly be an issue in raid? I don't think.
Yeah, I think the only boss it looks like it might be an issue for is Smolderon, simply because you get a 100% DPS amp at around 1 minute 10.
So you mean the augmentation modes of possibility boss, right?
Yeah, yeah, that one. Ooh,
Yeah.
I like that idea. I mean, let's be honest though. Like,
We'll see.
if you're in a guild that's like try hard, they're gonna force you on augmentation. I think it's like the outlook is very grim, right? I mean, especially if you're looking at what world first guilds are probably gonna do, and I'm sure it's gonna be a clown show if things stay the way they are, because there's some funny stuff you can do with your comp. But yeah, that fight felt pretty good. I did notice that, like, in general, Devastation just felt like undertuned in raid. And I know obviously like the logs are messed up because if you have an augmentation evoker in your PTR, just a heads up, the attribution is not working correctly. So augmentation is doing less damage than it should be, and the other classes are stealing the damage. So it's a little different for every class, but the hooks aren't quite fully cooked yet. But even with that in mind, right, it felt like Devastation was kind of just like generally underperforming. I don't know if y'all have had this sense too, in like raid specifically, but it felt like I could do really good if there was like a bunch of AoE for me to do, but otherwise I'm kind of down there like with the augmentations.
Yeah, I think we'll see what the first couple tuning passes look like, and this is just like purely from like the damage meters that I've seen. Did it look like Dev probably needs a little bit of a bump, and some of the other specs were wildly outperforming, and of course some of those tier sets are currently a little bit busted. So yeah. I'm sure there will be tuning coming in, and we'll have to see kind of what that looks like.
I'm actually terrified, waiting on all the future spreadsheets from Lord Jereico on mastery, because I have 88% mastery right now on live, but then I logged into PTR, I have 67%, and then a 5% damage buff. I just don't think it's enough. I really hope that small paragraph that says, okay, we're going to look at, you know, more tunings in the future to try and compensate for this. I hope that's big, because I'm really, really paranoid.
Yeah, well, the good news is versatility would be a lot better for you. So there's that.
Yeah, but there's a negative scaling past 30. So I think the stocks for haste are just going to go way up, in my opinion, for arena anyways. For
I could definitely see it. I think you're gonna. I mean, again, you're getting hit one more time on your burst. I think. Yeah. No, from a math standpoint, if you sort of imagine Devastation as just doing constant damage throughout a pull, the math works out such that they've been fully compensated in the mastery change. That's not exactly how Devastation works. It has cooldowns, and you do more damage immediately on pull. So strictly speaking, that's how we calculate a little bit of a nerf overall, and effectively why you see a loss in the value of mastery specifically. But math-wise, I could share a little chart with you that sort of shows what the impact is over someone's life, so to speak. In terms
that would
of
be
the value
great.
of mastery.
Yeah.
The best thing possible is the 30% floor. That's great.
Yeah.
I will say, like, in my own sims, I noticed that crit was like really pumping. Like, crit was the highest for me, and then it's like once I get a certain level of mastery, it's like suddenly haste is popping up there too, and then, oh, would you look at that versatility? So I'm like kind of running almost like rainbow build. In fact, one of the first things I did was I just like leveled I like calculate how much secondaries I had total, and I just divided it and put in the equal amount for each one. And it was surprisingly close to where I ended up getting it with optimizations, which is kind of cool. Like, I think that's kind of a neat thing. And it means that we're going to have no situation really where it's like we're being held back by, you know, itemization. So it's cool, but then also, you know, you're playing Og, so guess what? You're just gonna want mastery gear. So it's like it doesn't really matter, right? You're gonna be overstacked on mastery. So, but yeah, if you have it, that'd be cool to link it. I don't know if you were like offering to link it right now or if it needs to be cooked still.
Nah, crap. 1 sec.
But while you do that though, yeah, I mean, so like I think all of us kind of have the same feelings, at least from what we've talked about so far. Like we all kind of think like, yeah, augmentation's neat, but like also it seems a little OP. Devastation's like I think what all of us enjoy playing. Are any of you being forced against your will to play augmentation next tier? And what is your, I guess, what's your feelings on that? Do you mainly play the game just for fun and you're mad about it, or are you just kind of like vibing?
If I seriously do Mythic Plus again, which I probably will because that's what I enjoy the most, then yes, I kind of feel like I'm in Og prison. Unless I want to like play like an outlaw rogue or something like that, I guess. But then for raid, I'm very fortunate in the guild I'm in. They're letting me play dev if that's what I want to play. So I kind of lucked out there.
I just flashbanged the stream, but I brought up your your chart.
All my stuff in Google Sheets is white background, and it's the best whenever I try and put it somewhere. I really should adjust this because I've actually put in the 5% under the 10.2 value, and strictly speaking, if we're measuring the value of a secondary stat, that'll come down by 5%. But what I really wanted to see was again like how they arrived at the math, like how they came to, you know, hey, we're going to nerf the mastery by 25%, put a floor at 30, and then buff by 5%. And that's where sort of, if again, you sort of assume that you're doing steady damage throughout sort of a boss's health, that sort of equivalency point happens at around 30%. Where that floor is, that's where mastery is sort of more valuable now and is less valuable in the old paradigm, right? And then, you know, so to speak, again, this is kind of what changes in the curve. So you're going to do, you know, a little bit less damage, you know, in terms of that ramp, but it's very obvious what that last, you know, bit of the fight looks like. And if you're trying to take someone out, if you're trying to get that killing blow in PvP, it might be better, right?
I imagine it's better, yeah. Because I remember
better than doing no damage.
I remember, JD, we were talking about PvP before, and it was like I remember when before augmentation, it was like your win con was like shattering star into deep breath, right? Like that was like how you had to, or get lucky, right, with scintillation procs early on.
Yeah, you have to really get lucky with your crits. I mean, the highest I've hit recently is with fire breath is 327,000. But I mean, pretty consistently, sometimes I get 300k Eternity Surges on a target. You know, but I like to use a chronal loop as well. Like I loop somebody really low, and then they get topped, and then I finish them off that way. That's how I've been able to kill recently, especially in shuffle.
Have you been experiencing the empower bug recently or on PTR, like where you press your empower and you press it again and it doesn't work? Yeah, let's talk about that. Kess,
for which spec?
For devastation or augmentation. Honestly, it happens for preservation too. I think it's all three.
The upheaval bug is now what the old Eternity Surge bug used to be, where if you get stunned or you get, you know, micro CC'd at the launch of it, it doesn't go off and the damage does registered. That's still persistent for upheaval that I know of.
That's annoying. Are you having it like cancel though? Like you like pressed it without anyone messing with you. You pressed it again when it was ready, and then nothing happens, and you have to press it a third time.
So I went to my settings actually the other day, and because what I like to do is I like to, you know, press Eternity Surge for dev. I press Eternity Surge, then I immediately want to start channeling Disintegrate, and I found a setting that seems to have a blocker for it. If you would like that.
Yeah, can you just copy paste it, because I know a lot of people are having this issue. I know myself. There's like 3 different CVARs that are associated with empowers. One tells it if it's push and tap or whatever, or like hold and release, and then the other 2 have to do with like how you actually use it. But my settings are all default. But Kess, you said that you're also experiencing this bug.
Yep. Yeah, literally the first key I hopped into on the PTR, it was like, I'm in Dragon Rage. I'm like, oh, my fire breath just canceled on me. Oh, it canceled again. Okay, it went off. Now it's Eternity Surge to get my last extension. Oh, wait, that didn't work either. And then I lost my Dragon Rage, and I was like, this is my first key. I want to log off already. I was like, there's no way this is back again. I can't do it.
It's like the gift that keeps on giving. I swear this bug has been quote unquote fixed and also has just never gone away, right? Like it literally, I swear this thing is just haunting the class. And yeah, it's the same for me. I think on PTR it's actually way worse because there's like some weird lag, right? And I feel like with the lag, it gets 100 times worse. I did a PTR test and it was like the first boss. It was literally the first PTR test we had on there. And I had it bug out like 7 times in a row. I think I lost my entire Dragon Rage from the first Empower. And I was very stubbornly trying to use the Empower over and over and over and over again. I was like, no, I will Eternity Surge here. I don't care what you're saying, game. And it literally just never went off. My character's just like stomping over and over and over again and nothing goes off. It's actually so tilting though. But hopefully they're looking into it. Hopefully that one's, maybe it'll get fixed again and then it'll just break again next patch, but you know. I don't know. It's that to me is one of the more frustrating things about Devastation still. It's just hasn't ever gone away. But other than that though, I think the playstyle itself like feels good. I like being able to just send mine powers and not really care. I think in raid, like it always feels pretty good because like you can pretty much always plan it so you get the full value of your cooldowns. Mythic Plus can be a little tilting, but I think overall Devastation feels good. Obviously the tuning isn't quite there. And especially if you compare it against Augmentation, the tuning is not even close. But I think the spec has some of the same issues it still has from, you know, last time we had to talk, right? Aggro issues, maybe some defensive issues. Deep Breath still feels like a liability. Like I don't really press that button. I don't like pressing it. I feel like it kills me more often than anything else. But I'd say like I feel like Devastation is still good, or like I would define it as good. Would you define it as good, Jereico?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and just check one of those points since you guys have been doing a little bit of testing on aggro. I would have at least hoped, cross fingers, that the mastery change and the new set bonus do something to make aggro feel a little bit less noticeably an issue. But is it still same as ever, or
Still an issue?
All right.
Yeah.
Darn.
I have Preheat's interview with the game dev or the AUG dev from way back when.
Yeah.
And I have the timestamp memorized of when he said just wait longer. And that just lives rent free in my head because like it's still an issue today. You hop on PTR, you press Dragon Rage, it's still a problem.
That's like guys answer for everything.
Love you, Graham, but we're
gonna get back to it eventually.
Sorry, Graham.
Like what?
Yeah, I also have a couple timestamps I've sent a couple times. Like my favorite is the one talking about stats for augmentation. How like mastery is a problem. The others aren't really feeling like they do anything, and like, are we gonna get some equalization here? What's the deal? Why is it all mastery? And here we are, third DR, and we're still like, yeah, you just pile the mastery on, man. 9,500 ain't enough. I need more mastery, baby. Like, I don't know. It feels so bizarre to like only care about one stat. I guess now we have like some incentive for haste because we could potentially play threads, maybe get a fourth, you know, prescience out and have that slight, you know, 1 second window to get our ebb and might out. But aside from that, it's like just play mastery, right?
So even if you don't get the ebb and might off, you still get the benefit of the tier set as long as you get the prescience off, right? So that much isn't as big of an issue maybe as you might think. As long as you have the 3 prescience and you do the strategy where you stack on top of a 4th person, you're going to have pretty good control of your ebb and mites, and you're going to get the 4 stacks on the tier set, on the 4 piece. So it looks silly, but I put the 4 stack scenario in the article for a reason. I think it is possible to get value out of it. So we'll have to see how that looks. And I'm actually kind of optimistic about playing threads in raid the more I think about it. There's definitely some value to be had from our sort of time skip opener, getting out those extra shifting sands, that kind of thing. That's very strong. But having very consistent sort of 4 stacks of prescience just frequently throughout the fight is also very attractive. So I think that could see some play.
Yeah, I agree. And it definitely also feels good to just have your cooldowns be faster. So this is a good point to talk a little bit more about augmentation defensives. So Obviously, there's a lot of contributing factors as to why augmentation is so unbelievably tanky, right? You can point at the easy ones like the cheat death, right? Really, really good. You can point at stuff like them just having like a shield every time they put out their obsidian scales. Yeah, we've got blistering scales with molten blood, which they've nerfed by 50% now in the patch, but still very strong, right? These are all strong things, but one thing that like really gets underlooked, I feel like, and it's just so ridiculous, is the fact that your mastery affects everything.
That's wild to me, man.
It isn't just your offensive buffs. It's your scales, your defensive, right? It's your renewing blaze. It lasts
you have,
longer.
Like, every heart in the game from a Resto Druid. Those are just being extended because you're mastery.
Like your Twin Guardian lasts longer. Zephyr lasts longer. Like there's so much stuff that's built into the class that's like really good. And like Devastation, honestly, I think a big part of why the death statistics is so high is because of aggro. I know, like, personally in Sarkrat, if the tank screwed up ever, I would always be meleeed and the fight would just go on like normal, right? Like, this is just a very common occurrence if you're playing Devastation. You just have innately high threat at all times, even on raid bosses. 4 minutes into the fight, you'll still be top threat, right? So, like, it feels like I'm pretty tanky generally, but, like, augmentation, the fact that you're just, like, increasing it with your mastery, every single aspect of it is just absurd. It feels like
you want another really noticeable one? Hover uptime.
Yeah. Yep. Oh yeah. Let's talk about that. So hover, when does it fall off is augmentation, right? Especially if you're playing time spiral. Like, let's be real. When does it fall off? Because I feel like I have hover the whole time. Like I can probably hover the entire time, especially if there's multiple augmentation, because we can just use our time spirals around each other, and you pretty much always have a time spiral up, right? Because short cooldown, 2 minutes. And if you got 4 or 5 in the raid, that's a lot of time spirals per minute.
And when I don't, I press spatial paradox.
Yep.
And then I can still move.
Well, see, I saved that for when my healer. Yeah, I saved that for when my healer needs it. But yeah, are we playing the stretch time talent? Is anyone here playing that talent ever?
No.
Like Chrono Ward.
I take it when I can, but usually it's one of the first to go for sure.
Chrono Ward instead.
Yeah, I mean, Chrono Ward is like a given, I think, for most PvE. Like, you just always run Chrono Ward, I think.
Like 130k shield.
Yeah, it was like bugging out the first week. It was like a 3 million shield. But yeah, it's pretty good.
Do you want to see Pre what I have there as the like default raid setup and the presets in there for WoW?
Yeah, let's do that.
I should just have like a default raid one.
Here it is.
So I don't have spatial paradox in this setup, and I do have stretch time, but you can definitely sort of route around it and or skip it if you sort of want a little more utility, if you want the kick cooldown, a couple other things. Yeah,
I feel like in raid it's justifiable, like I can run stretch time, but in Mythic Plus I feel like I'm trolling if I play that, honestly. Like there's just so much value I'm losing, right? It's like if I'm gonna drop a talent, it's either gonna be like Tectonic Locus, or like I'm dropping Pupil of Alexstrasza maybe for my Bestow Wyrnstone, right? Moving some other stuff around, but I feel like I never play stretch time in Mythic Plus, and it sucks because I cheat death a lot. Like, in fact, if you were to chart my cheat deaths, I think probably about 80% of my cheat deaths are during Deep Ret, because it's just like, hey, here's a pack and I need a Deep Ret at this precise time, but guess what? There's like a Null spinning who's not being de-enraged, or there's like a circle that spawns after I started, or like some other stupid thing happens. Like, it's just, yeah.
Well, my favorite are the bosses especially that have mechanics where like you really don't want to be right on top of them for whatever reason. It's like, I'm thinking like Rashok Intermission, or there's the
Shark Puncher.
Completely blanking. Shark. I mean, that's a good one, right?
Yeah.
Definitely anything where it's like, hey, stay away from the boss right now, right? You have to kind of like finagle your way to clip the edge of the melee hitbox, maybe, and pray the boss doesn't just one shot you. It's you mentioned it before that like Breath of Eons as your major cooldown is like absolutely ridiculous, and I mean it's just the cherry on top of this ridiculous spec.
Yeah. So. I think it's literally like the clown spec, right? You come out of your clown car and you're just flying in. Think about like phase 3 of Sarkrat, right? You come up, you've got the haste buff, everyone's buffed. It's like, I need to get my Breath of Aeons on that boss now, right? And then guess what? The boss is doing the frontal, and you got bombs dropping. So you literally have like a 2-second window to get in there and get out, or else you're going to wipe the raid. Oh, and by the way, swirlies can spawn while you're flying, and you can just take one and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, because you're not flying over them. Yeah.
Yeah, Swirly's on the ground, which is weird because like I thought it said that my dragon's in the air. It says I'm flying, but
And you can
for
just double jump over those normally. and
yeah,
knock it
but
down.
for some reason I'm getting hit with it with deep breaths. Not really sure what's going on there.
Wiping the
Free
raid with
wall
the frontal.
recall. That's what I would do.
I have actually been playing recall in
I
in
loved
raid.
it when it first came out. It was one of my go-tos. I was breaking
It's a
so many
cool
ankles
button.
with it.
Yeah, I wouldn't dare
It's on
touch it on
global, though.
Devastation because like I want all the utility I could possibly get and all the survivability buttons and exactly it's on the global, which is like
It feels terrible.
give up
Imagine
damage.
having an alter back when then that's cost you a global. Like I couldn't.
Yeah, without health even. Okay, how do y'all feel about this? So what if Recall was reworked where it was like a it changed your breath, deep breath and breath of Aeons to be like a 2-second cast, but you sent it out and you didn't have to
Just
move.
be baseline. No
I'd love
global.
it. Just do it. Like, put that in the game in some way. Yeah, I don't care. Make it a talent, make it baseline, like whatever. Just
You mean like sending like a
something.
clone to do it for you?
Yeah.
Yeah, the bronze clone, literally the clone that
Yeah.
you leave. You're
Oh,
sending
that'd
that
be
dude.
neat.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Throw him.
Yeah, I just
yeah,
for me it's
Feels so
like
bad being
number
on global,
one,
it really does.
you can only use it within the 3-second window, right? So you have to use it right away. Number two, like you said, it's a global, right? And number three, you have to put 2 points into innate magic to get it no matter what. So it's very expensive to get. And it's ineffective in the sense that like you have to waste time, you have to like give up damage or something else for it, and you have to do it right away, right? There's like it just feels like way overly restrictive, I guess, to me. Cool. So yeah, I think it's maybe time to just like give our closing thoughts. So I guess the way we'll structure this is for your form of content, whatever you focus on most, and you can talk about that. Do you feel like Devastation and Augmentation are on equal footing? Do you feel like it will make sense for people who want to play one or the other to get to play the one they want? Or do you feel like it's maybe a little one-sided, and what you are kind of hoping for in the next coming weeks with the patch notes? So I'll start with JD. What are your hopes and dreams?
Hopes and dreams is that they give a complete overhaul relift on Devastation survivability. I mean, you can only play Devastation in a very, very controlled format, only with a Death Knight and a healer. That's because like we're 25 yards, we can't get to anybody. Like Mage Lock, they're just guiding us forever, and that's where the DK comes in and just set up a blender type situation. Augmentation, though, however, you can play with anyone. It doesn't matter, right? It's not so contingent upon the fact that like you're 25 yards. For the few, I don't understand how they did this like this, where they just gave all these tools to Aug and not to Dev. But I'm really hoping that for the future, it can maybe bridge the gap a little bit, because it just seems like one spec is just way better than the other right now. So that's what I'm hoping for with that little baby paragraph from the devs, hoping in 10.2.
Yeah. What are your hopes and dreams, Kess?
Oh my god, I just saw that number.
Oh yeah, I'm mousing over how many of the characters, 25 keys, Mythic plus 25 and above on this leaderboard for the patch. 4,500 or 4,055 augmentation and 80 devastation.
Wow.
Seems
Yeah,
okay.
that's a yeah.
Yeah, I mean for Mythic Plus, like obviously they're nowhere even close to being on the same level. Even if we were going into a tier where AUG wasn't yet implemented and didn't exist, I think Dev would do okay in Mythic Plus. I think it would maybe be like in the middle tier, high middle tier maybe. It certainly wouldn't be meta, but I think it would do well. But because AUG exists, unless this spec is just doing the most damage in the world to warrant taking a double dragon, because you generally don't like class stacking in Mythic Plus.
It's also against the rules in a lot of the formats that they do, the competitions.
Yeah, in competitive play. Yeah. So unfortunately, like, it's good. I like it. It's playing well. It was doing good numbers, but you're always going to be under the shadow of AUG unless we see more changes there. And defensively, I don't know if I would want maybe a little bit more, but I think defensively, like Dev is, if you understand damage profiles in Mythic Plus, you can, script your defensives pretty well to survive in there. I would just want to give it something more, take something from AUG and
Cheat death.
give us something that to bring to the group. I don't know about cheat death.
I need it.
I would take it. I would take it if they don't change deep breaths. Because then that's an excuse for
Sure.
me to deep breath if it's cheat that's
Sure,
up.
there
You
you
know what I
go.
mean? But no, it's probably a little too strong. But I mean, like just like a crumb, just like a little crumb.
Just something, yeah. Even something unique I would take, just to be like, oh, okay, Dev has this and Og doesn't, you know. I think that would help as well. But again, lots of wishing, and I don't think actually I have a question for you guys in that regard, because I said unless Dev is doing the absolute most damage to warrant bringing like a class stacking a double dragon, or Og somehow gets terminated. Outside of numbers, what do you guys think it would take for Dev to be like brought up to like an S tier level of gameplay?
Survivability for one, maybe even utility.
I think Devastation will never be like S tier as long as Augmentation exists in its current state. I think even if you were to nerf specifically the buffs the Augmentation gives, so none of its personal damage, just its buffs by like 35%, I think you would still prefer it over Devastation and Mythic Plus. It's just that good, right? And I don't see any reality where like now that the genie's out of the bottle, I don't see Devastation as like a serious spec anymore. Like you can play it as like it's like a hobby spec, or like it's fun. It's off meta. It can be, you know, I enjoy it a lot, but like, let's be real, right? It does not compare against Augmentation in any form of content, period, in the story.
Are we survival hunters?
Pretty much.
Oh, no.
It's kind of a meme
We're a
spec, I
fun
think. I mean, like,
spec.
it used to be fun. And that's the thing, too, is like, I actually enjoyed Dragonflight a lot. It was my favorite expansion. I loved it until 10.1.5 or whenever it was, the dreaded Augmentation, Augpocalypse, right? And I really tried my best to enjoy Augmentation and to be open-minded about it. But it's just like, at this point, I'm out of, I'm all out, and I've given up my happy face, and I'm ready to just talk very plainly about it.
There's no, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know it's the first of its kind, so that it's kind of in a unique spot, but there's no other class in the game that has a DPS spec that's like so like thrown in the back and forgotten about, like completely overtaken by the other one, a different spec of the same class. Like you take all the mage specs, all the warlock specs, they're always played, you know? They like sometimes rotate tiers, sometimes two of the specs are good in a tier, but like even Survival Hunter, you know, it had its time, it's played, it's still played.
Yeah.
I would actually
Dev
go a
is
step
just
further.
thrown in the back.
I think it's that, and it's also the fact that the playstyle for the two are so different. Because I would say playing Augmentation, to me at least, it feels more like I'm playing a healer than it feels like I'm playing a DPS. I'm thinking more like a healer. I'm looking at my frames. I'm trying to make plays. I'm trying to save people. Like, I'm not really focused on myself. I'm just kind of like doing the rotation while I'm looking at everything else that's happening.
I mean, I think that's entirely right.
Same thing for Shaman, right? Wasn't Shaman when it first released like a pretty support spec?
Oh, like
Right?
enhancement?
You're just like a win. Yeah, you're just like a Wind Fury totem bot, kind of.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, like, I just don't see a reality at all, Kess, where it's on equal footing, even like not even S tier, just like on equal footing, so long as the spec stays the way it is, because it's so good, right? And that's fine. I mean, like, I'm sure a lot of people are enjoying it. It's just, it seems a little weird that the promise was like, oh, well, if this is overshadowing Devastation, we're going to bring in line. And it's like 3 weeks in, all we've seen is this baby 6% nerf, right? That you could have doubled, you could have even maybe tripled, and it wouldn't change anything, right? Like, that just feels like, it's disappointing. But we obviously have more tuning to come. It's just, my outlook is very negative currently. What's your hopes and dreams, Jereico?
Yeah, so right now, especially, so, you know, from a raid focus, it's going to depend on your guild, your group, your objectives, and sort of, you know, like how quickly you want to clear the content, how seriously you take raiding and that kind of thing. Because as it stands, and, you know, we'll see kind of where tuning lands, but I'm willing to say right now that the average, you know, gamer, without thinking too hard about it, will probably deal similar damage on Devastation and Augmentation. I think the best, sort of most prepared guilds, the ones that are willing to put in the effort and properly strategize, it's no question that Augmentation is still bringing the most value. But for sort of the average player that's just, hey, I'm going to show up in a couple raids every week, we're going to kill the bosses together, we're gamers, right? I would say that strictly speaking, you might have the option to play Devastation if that's where your heart lies. And, based on sort of the current tuning, the current numbers. However, and this is sort of the big caveat, are you willing to play Devastation when Augmentation exists and is basically unkillable in raid and brings extra utility to keep other people alive as well and can do jobs while doing sort of, a very straightforward rotation? Like, there's sort of this reckoning that has to happen where you have to go, hey, these things are kind of doing similar damage at the end of the day, but am I doing the right thing by my raid if I play Devastation? Or do I have to play Augmentation just because it, frankly, like, when I say it's unkillable, I'm not joking. Like, we can argue about whether Devastation's spot on this death chart is warranted. And frankly, for all the discussion I see around, well, just use your cooldowns better and whatever. I mean, the facts don't lie. People die on Devastation a lot, right? That's, like, it's right there. People are dying. Whereas Augmentation, there are a couple of reasons for it, but like you'll see all the cheat death classes, for example, are sort of clustered towards the top end. But also, you're likely to be able to wear a Spore Cloak on Augmentation. You just naturally have more health. Your buffs last longer. You're always getting the benefit of your, your.
You can also heal at a
your
lower
extra
cost
health.
to yourself. You can literally just heal yourself, and it's like it's not really costing you much.
It's very easy to do that. Just a million reasons why Augmentation is just much more survivable. And like I mean, I know in raid when I'm playing Augmentation, I'm often the last one standing. I have to wait for my cheap death to die. The tank's are already dead. I'm just waiting to die so that we can go next. It's just that kind of spec now. And so that's the thing. Like, bottom line for raid, I again, if your raid is not like 100% committed to like to winning a progress race or something like that, you should be in a spot where you can probably feel okay playing Devastation, especially if you are in a spot where you take things pretty casually and you're willing to sort of play what you like and play well. But I do think for the more competitive guilds, you have this very obvious question you have to ask yourself is like, am I inting by playing Devastation? Am I, throwing by playing this like much squishier class ultimately, and or preventing my raid from having the option to sort of engage in some of these deeper strategies to sort of buff other classes and stack buffs and that kind of thing. So that's where, like, where damage is equal, it's very hard to suggest playing Devastation. That said, I see myself playing Devastation on some of the easier fights in the raid. I see myself continuing to try and play it on farm when I can. It's just for those harder progress fights, I really don't see I don't see a road where I play Dev. That just remains how it is.
Jereico, how many Aug Evokers do you think you'll see in a raid comp at the like Race to World First level?
Yeah, I really don't want to make the prediction because my actual thoughts on the matter are they will run as many as they can like actually make a strategy for and kill the boss in enough time.
Okay.
The sky is technically the limit unless the boss has mechanics that you just can't play around by positioning around Augmentation. The only thing is whether it's worth it or not. Essentially, there will be for example there will be bosses that are, I think anything under like 40 pulls, it's probably not worth designing an Augmentation strat for, assuming that
Right.
you can just kill the boss normally, so to speak, right? Because again, Augmentation strats require very careful planning around who you're buffing when, who you're buffing every 30 seconds, setting up your prescience 30 seconds in advance, and for maximum benefit, 30-second pull timer with a minute between pulls, which is clowny. It's outrageous, right? But if they need to squeak out a little bit more damage, they can run 4 more Augmentation, take a minute between pulls with a 30-second pull timer, and absolutely blast for the first minute of the fight, right? So that is a tool in the toolbox right now for those top guilds. We'll see if they actually bother with it, but it's there.
Second part of the question then is, without saying a number or predicting, like, on those fights where you think they'll bring max Augs, and then including all the mandatory group buffs from other classes in the game, do you think that even leaves one spot for a Dev Evoker to fit in? Like, do you think the tuning is there to sneak a Dev
you
in?
really have to ask, like, is Devastation the best, damage dealer in that spot? Because, like, you have all of the Evoker utility covered, like, infinitely, right? You have more than enough Evokers to cover, like, covering the raid in Zephyrs and Shifting Sands and, all this, right? There's a world where, assuming tuning lands in a certain place, that Dev just ends up being one of those buff targets for Og, sort of especially with the sort of flattening of a lot of the burst classes. Like there is technically a world where if Devastation gets a little bit of a damage bump, and they get like a healer PI, that they get set up as one of the sort of Og buff targets for the start of the fight. There is a possibility for that. I don't necessarily see it likely with current tuning, and therefore I'm a little pessimistic that we see Dev in some of these sort of top compositions, just as a matter of current practicality. But it's technically possible depending on where tuning lands, for sure.
Yeah. So for me, my hopes and dreams are just I think as a support spec, as augmentation, like with all of its benefits that it brings, we were talking about before, it's having every benefit, right? It's in all categories, just exceptional. I don't think this spec should do as much damage as a normal DPS, straight up. I think it should do less. I think if you're bringing an augmentation, the trade-off should be that you're losing damage, but you're gaining the utility, you're gaining the defensiveness, but it is going to underperform. And right now is the exact opposite. It overperforms. It does better than every other class. So what I would like to see is them to bring augmentation while we're still waiting for like the support role to actually be cooked, while we're waiting for them to figure out what they're doing with the support role. I think you just take the damage and you lower it to the point where it is bad damage, right? But you're getting the other benefits. The benefits are it's easy to play. It's impossible to die. You have all this utility. You can do all these jobs. You can do all these other things, right? And it's still invaluable in Mythic Plus because it's still bringing out defensives, but the damage must be lower or else it makes no sense to ever not bring it. Straight up, in the story. You cannot balance it in its current state when it's doing this much damage as another DPS. Forget about Devastation. Think about it in like the big picture, right? It just can't happen. So I would like for them to bring it down to that level. And it's funny because I'm actually playing augmentation, like, and I plan to play it next patch. So like I'm actively advocating against my own best interests here, but I think it really needs to be looked at. The damage is way too high. And I would also like for them to fix prescience. I want them to give prescience a longer range. I feel like 25 yards is just ridiculous, right? And I would like some other quality of improvement things, but like those are the main two things that are pain points for me. It's like prescience and the amount of damage just being absurd. And if they were to nerf it, just nerf the buffs. Make it so that the ratio is 55 to 45 or something, right? Like bring my personal performance up so it actually matters a bit, maybe half, right, of the damage is coming from me, and then have the buffs be lower so that now you get less value out of stacking it. You get less value out of like having it just kind of payphone and getting the damage of everyone else. So I think the best way to summarize it is I have healers in my guild, right? And they play all sorts of different healers. They play everything. Every healer I play with is like, they may not be like trying to, play the super high end, but they're kind of in that meta mindset. So like they're playing all the healers, or like they specialize in one, but they may have a couple other alts and they just, forget about one. But all of them kind of are saying the same thing, which is we don't want to play Evoker. And I asked them why. Why don't you want to play Evoker? And they're like, oh, well, because if I get forced to DPS, I don't want to play Augmentation. And that actually took me aback. I was like, oh my God, that is crazy. Because for me, like that's how I feel about Devastation, but it's like so much more of a in my face. Like it's, it's a reality for me, right? Like for them, they're like thinking, oh, well, even if I just get asked like every couple weeks, I don't want to play Augmentation so bad that I will refuse to play Preservation. Like I want to play only other healers. And I think that about sums it up for me. So yeah, hopefully we get some more tuning. I'm really hoping they look at this thing, but my prediction is if they don't change anything, I think we're going to see some really funny kills. It may not be in the Race to World First, but we'll definitely see it in the speed kills. I mean, we've already been seeing it, right? The stacking that Color has been doing and other guilds who are kind of following their lead when it comes to min-maxing around Augmentation. It's hilarious. So I hope that this is like a wake-up call for Blizzard, seeing them do these kills, that maybe they need to assess how it is scaling, because it's scaling out of control. But that is it. Yeah, I'd like to thank you all again for coming by. Appreciate it. One last plug, JD. Hit me with your plug. Where can I find you?
My Twitch channel is JD_yadig, and my YouTube is Coach JD.
Sweet. Jereico, where can I find you?
Jereico, that's Jereico on most of the major social media. I'm copying Steve on Twitter for some reason, but handles are hard to come by there. You can ping me on Discord. You can visit my site. There's links everywhere. So see you around.
Sweet. And Kess?
Just Twitch and Twitter, both Kess Live. I have a really cute dog. She's all my content. Give her love.
I'm the same way with my cat. My cat is like, she actually just got up and left, but she's, skipping work today, I guess. Yeah, I love having the pets on stream. Cool. Well, yeah, once again, thank y'all. It's like thundering and lightning outside, so I might lose power here any second. Ooh. But yeah, I appreciate it. Y'all making the time, and shout out to Goop as well, who gave us his quote, even though he wasn't able to be here. Let's do this again sometime soon. Hopefully we'll have more stuff to talk about.
Yeah, love to.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Thank you guys so much.
All right, thanks.
Take care.
All right, that's it. So yeah, thank you again, chat, for being here. Appreciate y'all. Was fun, and I hope you enjoyed the chat. I will be uploading it to YouTube too, so if you missed it, if you didn't catch the start of it, we'll be able to recap that. Yeah, I don't know. I just, my heart really, it hurts because I love Evoker. I've had so much fun in this expansion, especially playing Devastation, and I just feel like my shiny new toy has been taken away. It's been replaced with a toy that just, it isn't doing it for me. So really hoping for a future where a Devastation dream can happen, where it can exist, where we can all play what spec we want, right? And not be completely bound by the meta. Yeah. But I'll still play Augmentation next patch. It's going to be so stupid. I'm actually excited to try and break the game with it in any way I can, because I'd like to showcase how stupid it is. That's my point. So, yeah. Thank you all. I'm going to wrap up the stream now. I definitely feel for you as I signed up for Devastation player. Yeah, exactly, Jereico. Devastation was the reason so many players came back and had fun. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of players are enjoying Augmentation, but I think that it shouldn't come at the cost of everything in the meta shifting to accommodate Augmentation. We didn't even really talk about this, but like, it's also making it so other classes, their balance is being affected, right? Because if you're looking at a raid where you're stacking a bunch of Augmentation Evokers, having classes in there that don't really scale well with Augmentation, or don't have cooldowns that match well with Augmentation, kind of becomes a liability. And there's not really many slots in the meta comp, right? Because if you're bringing so many Evokers, you don't really have much wiggle room. You got to bring your raid buffs too. So it's having like this crazy downstream effect. But anyways, I'm sure we'll talk about this more in the coming days, coming weeks. Hopefully we get some more notes from Blizzard. But thank you all for watching. We'll see you in the next one. And yeah, we'll chat again soon. Bye, everyone.